The realization that his own flesh and blood is completely losing his grip on reality has just hit Nick Tilsley like an absolute freight train. And if you have been watching the Cobbles recently, you know this is rapidly turning into one of the most heartbreaking tragedies we have ever witnessed. Young Sam Blakeman, a boy we have all come to love for his sharp mind and innocent soul, is deeply mentally unwell. The agony Nick feels right now, knowing he cannot just kiss it better or take his son's excruciating pain away, is shattering his entire world. It all stems back to Sam being the first one to crack the incredibly dark mask of Megan Walsh. She paraded around Weatherfield playing the saccharine, caring schoolteacher, but behind closed doors, she was hiding a deeply twisted secret. She was crossing boundaries that should never be crossed, harbouring a sinister, highly inappropriate control over young Will Driscoll. Before we unravel exactly how this disturbing revelation has pushed sweet Sam over the edge and into a terrifying world of hallucinations, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to CoronationST Update for all the latest tea, twists and Weatherfield gossip, because you absolutely do not want to miss how this saga ends. When the jigsaw pieces of Megan's secret life finally began to slot together in Sam's brilliant mind, the truth was devastating. He figured out she had a dark, deeply improper dynamic with Will and had been manipulating the young lad for some time. But as predatory as Megan is, she is equally vicious and entirely calculating. When she realized Sam had figured her out, she immediately sought to eliminate the massive threat he posed. She wasn't just trying to cover her tracks, she wanted to absolutely destroy this boy for daring to stand up to her. Sam is incredibly smart, and he knew he needed proof, so he bravely planted a hidden camera in Megan's flat. But Megan is entirely too cunning for her own good. When she discovered the device, she gleefully staged an Oscar-worthy performance, deliberately making it look like she was pushing Will away and behaving entirely by the book. Then, she waited like a spider in a web. Catching Sam right in the act of trying to retrieve the camera, Megan tore into him. Her voice was chilling, devoid of any humanity. She aggressively threatened to completely ruin him, promising to publicly brand Sam as an intrusive creep and spin a horrible narrative about him violating her privacy. She did not just stop at verbal threats. Having an uncanny ability to zero in on exactly what hurts her targets the most, Megan took direct aim at Sam's greatest source of pride, his academic reputation. She sneakily sabotaged his coursework and his grades. For Sam, whose entire identity and confidence have been deeply tied to his intelligence and his absolute love for learning, this felt like he was being erased. As his academic prowess began to systematically strip away, the sheer panic set in. Desperate to keep up, terrified of failing, and crumbling under the psychological weight of Megan's blackmail, Sam made a terrible choice. He turned to strong prescription focus pills to try and unnaturally bolster his abilities. The pressure proved to be entirely too much for his young body, leading to a catastrophic reaction. His misuse of the medication caused a total system failure. The sight of little Sam completely collapsing out on the open street in broad daylight was an absolute damn nightmare for anyone watching. He was urgently rushed to the hospital, weak and extremely vulnerable. But Megan's profound cruelty knows absolutely no bounds. Proving her malice is truly unmatched, she boldly followed him straight to his hospital bed. She stood over a weakened, fragile Sam and continued her psychological torture, coldly threatening that if he dared open his mouth, the nightmare awaiting him would be infinitely worse. Sam was frozen in sheer terror. However, Megan made one incredibly fatal error in her arrogant plan. She did not notice Sam's fiercely protective stepmum lurking right nearby. Leanne Battersby saw exactly what happened. She sensed the suffocating dread radiating from her stepson. With remarkable gentleness and maternal intuition, Leanne managed to coax the deeply buried truth out of a terrified Sam. The minute Leanne knew, Megan's long overdue downfall was brutally set in motion, and the community swiftly handled the threat. However, the agonizing reality of Weatherfield drama is that defeating the villain rarely repairs the emotional damage left behind. For Sam, the horrific ordeal was theoretically over, but inside his head, it had only just begun. It became painstakingly clear over the next few days that something was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong with his mind. The first signs were deeply subtle. Sam developed a heavy paranoia, genuinely convinced that invisible forces were out to get him. His intense fear primarily fixated on Will and Daniel Osborne. Daniel, completely unaware, had been used as an unwitting cover in a relationship with Megan, meant to hide her inappropriate obsession with Will. Sam's hyper-anxiety soon severely escalated beyond mere worry. It morphed into outright psychosis. The poor kid started having vivid, waking nightmares. Paranoia quickly gave way to extreme auditory and visual hallucinations. He would constantly hear phantom threats, envisioning Will emerging from shadows to exact some kind of brutal revenge. But nothing, and I mean nothing, is more profoundly unsettling than the main hallucination that Sam's fracturing mind managed to manifest. It took the form of the man he has always trusted most, Roy Cropper. But this wasn't our gentle, cardigan-wearing, thoughtful Roy. This hallucinated version of Roy was incredibly insidious. He was a deeply twisted, macabre shadow figure who constantly lingered just out of frame, endlessly whispering into Sam's ear that everyone around him was trying to inflict pain, insisting that the entire street was full of enemies hiding in plain sight. The sheer, heart-wrenching horror of watching a child terrified by a demonic version of his dearest friend truly pushes this storyline into uncharted emotional depths. Things rapidly hit a boiling, terrifying fever pitch right in the middle of the neighborhood. Sam suddenly finds himself confronted by the real Roy Cropper. Roy approaches him softly, expecting to discuss their usual afternoon chess strategy. But trapped behind his own frantic eyes, Sam only sees the twisted phantom from his mind. He entirely loses grip. Terrified for his own safety, Sam physically strikes out at Roy. There is shouting, extreme panic, and massive confusion. Pushed past the absolute brink, Sam violently shoves his beloved mentor away and wildly bolts down the street, blindly disappearing into the damp back alleys of the cobbles, fully consumed by sheer madness. It is Carla Connor Swain who eventually finds him huddled in an incredibly dark, isolated corner, whispering to phantoms no one else can see. Given her own intense, highly documented battles with paranoia and deep mental illness, Carla knows precisely what she is looking at. She doesn't scream. She doesn't startle him. She immediately recognizes the very specific kind of terrifying psychosis locking him in. Carla speaks softly, navigating his delusions just enough to safely lead the shivering, terrified boy out of the darkness. She carefully brings him back to Leanne and Nick, and watching the reality crash over them is incredibly hard to digest. Nick, Leanne, and Toya Battersby immediately pull together, rushing the boy to a highly secure clinical facility. Handing him over to medical professionals and leaving him in a hospital wing, knowing how entirely scared he is, shatters Nick completely. This leads directly into next week's unbelievably gripping fallout, where Nick simply cannot handle the catastrophic guilt and sheer pain consuming him. He is looking at a massive, incredibly arduous, uphill journey to help his boy come to terms with this diagnosis and even attempt the grueling treatment process ahead. The guilt of feeling like he entirely failed his son is burning Nick alive. When Eva Price and Ben Driscoll later pull Nick aside to gently mention that they had actually noticed Sam exhibiting strange behaviours well before the major collapse. The dam simply bursts. For Nick, hearing that other people noticed his son drowning while he was completely blind to it triggers an aggressive outpour of pure, raw, unregulated emotion. The outburst is so heavy and volatile that David Platt actually has to step in, gently advising the surrounding neighbours that maybe they should back up and give Nick some space to process this horrific trauma. But Nick decides to go far beyond taking space. In a move born purely from deep emotional torture, Nick fiercely demands that everyone leave. He starts frantically isolating himself, turning his massive grief outward into anger against his family. When Toya Battersby delicately tries to step into the crossfire, softly offering her support and shoulder, Nick ruthlessly shuts her out. Looking at her with completely hollowed-out, deeply resentful eyes, he makes it agonizingly clear that he wants her far away from him as well. He is pushing the people who are trying desperately to help him into the frozen distance, building an impenetrable emotional wall when he is absolutely at his weakest. Will Nick Tilsley completely fracture his most vital relationships at the exact moment he needs his family's unconditional support to pull Sam back from the mental edge? Are we watching a father break right alongside his child? And what happens when the people keeping the peace finally walk away from Nick's constant rejection? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to CoronationST Update, and keep notifications turned firmly on so you are the very first to know when the latest Cobbles drama drops.